Welcome to the Attract Your Ideal Clients podcast. This show is for entrepreneurs who sell their expertise, including trainers, consultants, and coaches looking for real-world, actionable marketing advice to help them identify their competitive strengths, find and fix the marketing bottlenecks that are holding them back, and confidently make the right marketing decisions for their unique business. In today's episode, we'll explore ways to use LinkedIn ads to reach highly targeted prospects for your training, consulting, or coaching business. Joining me once again is Carissa Richardson, founder and CEO of Kindred Strategy, a paid advertising agency in Dublin, Ohio. Now, before we get started, if you've hit a plateau in your training, consulting, or coaching business, I want to invite you to visit marcusschaller.com/subscribe for weekly troubleshooting guides and tips to help you find and fix the weak spots in your marketing that are holding you back, fine-tune your positioning and marketing strategy, and start growing again by attracting more of your ideal clients. Again, that's marcusschaller.com/subscribe. So today is going to be what I think it's our fourth episode together in the last couple of months. It's this wrapping up this epic saga of all things pay-per-click for trainers, consultants, and coaches, specifically kind of reviewing some of the opportunities that exist, right, for people that sell expertise to be able to reach a broader audience, to be able to reach a more specific audience that they might not be able to reach in other ways. We talked about advertising on YouTube. There was another one we talked. Well, the first time we
Google.
talked Google, and then YouTube, and then initially we talked more broadly, right? So we covered like social, different kind of opportunities there to use very targeted marketing that generally you pay per the click or you pay per the 1,000 impressions, that kind of thing. And today, to wrap up, we were going to talk about LinkedIn. And LinkedIn, advertising on LinkedIn is something that I don't personally have that much experience in. I'm always on LinkedIn, but I've never actually paid for advertising. So rather than kind of like worry about doing the high level view again, I'm going to let you kind of just take us through a tour about what LinkedIn pay-per-click advertising kind of looks like, and we can kind of bounce back and forth with some specifics if that works for you.
Yeah, definitely. So LinkedIn is definitely um, different in the way that they allow you to target and just the amount of data they have that's different from most other publishers. So they have access to professional data, to member skills, to how long somebody's been working, so how senior they are, how many years they've been working, just a plethora of professional data, which is very hard to come by in other places. So it makes it a really great place for B2B targeting. It does come in a premium. It's typically a little more expensive than some of the other social platforms, because they know that they have data that nobody else does. But you can typically get a lot more focused on your audience, so you end up getting a more efficient buy, even though you're paying a little bit more. You're only reaching the people that really make sense for your business.
And I think just to put a fine point on that, the cost per click might be more expensive, but context is so important in this, right? Because we live in this very weird metric-driven marketing world where there's like, we think in terms of how many likes, how many shares, how many whatever. But, there's likes and then there's likes, right? Like there's
Yeah.
how many people are following your LinkedIn profile or page, business page, and then there's like how many of those are actually your targeted audience. And so, again, to your point with LinkedIn, if you're paying to reach people by title, industry,
Mhm.
geography, and you're paying more per engagement, that could wind up being actually far more financially efficient than if you're paying what seems like less per click, but something maybe on YouTube or Google where it's harder to necessarily be that granular. Do you have any thoughts
Correct.
on that too?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing that's great is that you have the ability to get really niche and really target. The downside to it that I found also is that you really LinkedIn actually suggests that your audience size be at least 50,000 people. So it's while you can get really granular, you don't always want to because it could be a detriment to your ads. So what I like to do is really get um, granular where it matters, but keep everything else as open as possible. LinkedIn also provides a lot of data on the back end to show you who's clicking on your ads, by job title, by experience, by industry, all these things. So you can actually see later down the road, okay, well, this tends, if you keep it broader to begin with and just run your ads, you can start to see who's engaging with them and then refine your targeting from there. But it does get a little challenging, especially with very localized businesses. For instance, I had a recruitment hiring campaign I was running in New York. And it was just for nurses of this particular vertical of medicine and in New York. And we really struggled and ended up having to open it up broader than just New York because we couldn't even hit that minimum. So it definitely is great, but I just encourage you not to over target because there is that temptation with LinkedIn because there's so much at your disposal.
So, out of curiosity, what does LinkedIn, what's their claim as to why 50? I mean, I understand from their perspective, the more the better, right? So, there's
Mhm.
obviously the driving the more engagement and more clicks and more cost. But what about the 50,000 is kind of the magic number for them? Is it if you're like hypothetically, let's say if you wanted to do a hyper targeted campaign to 500 CEOs, right, of
Mhm.
particular companies in an industry, yes, I imagine you're going to get less engagement from that because it's so targeted. But would that not be, your own decision then as the advertiser?
Sometimes I think it just makes it challenging for LinkedIn to serve your ad. So let's say LinkedIn also does have minimums where most other social platforms don't. So LinkedIn's minimum is $10 a day. So you have to spend at least $10 a day on ads. They will just struggle to spend that minimum budget when if your audience is too small because they have to be able to find that person on LinkedIn that day and serve them your ad, and hope that they click on it. So it's just it just it's more of a scale issue where they just have trouble finding the amount of people that they need to find in order to get you any results. Because not every person that sees your ad is going to engage with it. And if your audience is very, very, very small, then they have trouble even finding those people to put your ad in front of, let alone getting them to engage with it.
Got it. So again, that's actually a good point then. So in general, are you only charged, is it like a pure pay-per-click situation, or are you only charged when somebody actually clicks on your ad? I imagine there's different
Mhm.
versions of this, right? You kind of walk us through how that might look. It's like what are the financial kind of options as far as spending on this kind of platform?
Yeah, typically LinkedIn is charging on a CPM basis, which is cost per thousand impressions. So you're paying whether somebody clicks on your ad or not. Anytime your ad is served up in their feed when they're scrolling, that you're charged for that. Um, so that is why you want to make sure that you can get your ad. I mean, your ad is very effective, so you're going to get as many clicks as possible. So it stands out and people will stop and look at it when they're scrolling because every time it's served up, it will count as an impression. And then there is also the risk with smaller audience sizes that your frequency, so the average number of times somebody in your audience sees your ad is going to be higher, and the higher your frequency, the quicker your ad will wear out, and you're going to need to replace it with a new ad. Because if you see an ad three, four, five times, then you're going to start ignoring it. So your audience is doing the same thing. So if you are targeting a really small audience and you have LinkedIn will show you frequency and it's reporting and you're getting this 9, 10 frequency, you're probably going to start to see clicks diminish off quicker than if you had a bigger audience, and you had that lower frequency.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I'm trying to picture it in my head, like a use case situation. So again, thinking in terms of trainers, consultants, coaches, uh, depending on their ideal client type and the kind of services, the kind of problems that they solve, the kind of services they offer. So on one hand, I can imagine, let's say, a coach who works with entrepreneurs, right?
Mhm.
And so certainly if this coach was to do a campaign on LinkedIn targeting entrepreneurs in the United States, and I'm sure there could be some other very good kind of filtering to as far as length of time in the business, that kind of thing. But they should have no problem having a universe, a potential universe of 50,000 people on LinkedIn, I would imagine, right? Where,
Yes.
right? So yeah, I was gonna just add, like, on the flip side of that, if you have somebody who is, let's say they're doing training and it's very much geared toward enterprise clients, and they're really just looking to target HR directors in, maybe, 3 to 500 companies that they're looking to kind of break into. That's where now it's much, much more challenging. And then there's probably there's this variety in between those, but those would probably be like the bookends of the extremes.
Yes, for sure. And those might be instances where you do target those companies, but you might have to just like add in some other layers just to increase your audience size a little bit. So it doesn't mean you can't target those people specifically within LinkedIn, but you might have to add in some other people outside of that just to make your audience large enough that you're gonna be effective.
Are there any, I know that there's no one cost per click involved in this, like there is in anything. Have you seen a general range? I mean, we're talking B2B, that's just the nature of LinkedIn, right?
Mhm.
And, for something that's reasonably targeted, what's the sense that you've seen as far as what these costs per clicks or these costs per thousand impressions might run?
Yeah, I mean, it really varies based on the ad campaign, the target, and it's a really kind of variable thing. But just as an example, your average cost per thousand impressions, cost CPM on Facebook might be $6, $5, $6, $7. Where on LinkedIn, you're sometimes seeing like $20, even $30. It's just a lot more premium. Um, of a CPM.
Where this really makes sense too, we talked a little bit about this a couple of 10 episodes ago, that whatever it was, right? But one of the thoughts I had had about this is where, when you're starting out, or if you're really just starting to rebuild or build your client base, or maybe you've hit a plateau, this might not be the best idea, right? It could be brilliant, it could be so effective. Where I see this really being useful, though, is for somebody who they've got a full client base, right? They're busy. What's dropping off for them is the active outreach, the prospecting, the keeping the funnel full, right? That's where a lot of
Mhm.
people really struggle. As soon as they start getting paid business, they're like, oof, I don't have to do prospecting. And then, you go through that up and down.
Yeah.
Where this could be really useful for people listening is if they're in a situation where they've got cash flow coming in. It's not like, oh, I'm desperate to figure out how to get some leads right now. They're time crunched, but they have some capital to work with. They have some revenue coming in and they can reinvest that. And where this might be something where it's relatively time efficient compared to active outreach or whatever. And if you've got 20, 30, $40 a day or $10 a day, whatever it is, to really start investing and optimizing the return on that, this could be really good for that, because now you can start to get some, I'll say passive, and I'm saying that with air quotes, right? It's not truly
Mhm.
passive, but you could start, figuring out how to get some interaction with your really target market without as much time as you normally would do. I guess the challenge then becomes, do you see it being LinkedIn in general? Is it quite as, uh, with Google AdWords or ads, sorry, with Google Ads,
Mhm.
what's great about it is that you can do lots of testing. You can do lots of split testing. Same thing with YouTube. Is LinkedIn kind of similar to that, or no?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, LinkedIn will actually recommend you run at least 5 different creative versions with every campaign. So they want you to run a variety of ads. You also can do experiments like you do in Google if you wanted to test different landing pages or different copy, different target audiences, things like that. I will say that LinkedIn is a little bit better at just keeping your audience generally aware of your business um, than it sometimes is at driving leads, just because you are reaching a little bit of a colder audience. They're not actively searching for a solution to a problem. You're just kind of, they're the right person, but you're not serving up the message isn't coming necessarily at the time that they're ready to act. So you might see a little bit less efficiency in conversion driving. You'll still see conversions, but maybe a less efficient than a Google ad would be, especially Google search. And then but they do have ways that you can sort of streamline things like they have lead ads where somebody clicks on your ad and it auto populates all their information from LinkedIn so they don't have to go through and fill out the lead form. So there are ways that you can make it a little more lead friendly, but I always say things like Meta, Instagram, LinkedIn, you're always going to be a little more upper funnel than you will be on search just because somebody's not actively looking for something at that moment. You just know that they fall into your key audience and that eventually down the road they might be interested. Another thing LinkedIn's really good for is if you have any kind of, I know a lot of coaches have like passive income generators, so they might have a workbook or a book or some kind of professional development content. If they're doing a webinar, things like that do really well with LinkedIn ads just to get you in front of the audience. Drive to a piece of content. It's a good, if you have any gated content, that's a really good way to generate leads on LinkedIn. Just asking for a lead on LinkedIn and or telling them about your business and expecting them to come to your site and fill out the lead form is not as likely to happen from a LinkedIn ad. From search, yes, probably, but not from LinkedIn as much. So what I find if you really want to generate leads from LinkedIn, it's best to come up with some sort of thought leadership piece that you can put on your site that's gated, or that pulls somebody into a nurture funnel, and get leads that way and nurture people from there versus just trying to get a straight lead like you might from a Google ad.
Well, and you just mentioned earlier that LinkedIn has actually the feature where it can auto populate. So hypothetically, the way I would picture that, and you can tell me if I'm on the right track, somebody has an ebook or they have some kind of, content that they're not charging for, right? Maybe they do, but at this point, let's just say it's a lead generator, and they want to get that lead generator out to this audience. Then somebody seeing it through their feed, they're interested. This is where the messaging really is very important and making sure that it's like they can relate to that problem that you're going to help them solve. But if they have that issue and it's something that's it's on top of mind for them, hypothetically, then they click it and then they can have it basically where through LinkedIn it just autofills all that. Where what would happen then? They hit, I want this, and to walk us through what that might
Yes.
look like.
So then LinkedIn will put that information into a spreadsheet. In the past, it had been really hard, and I didn't always encourage LinkedIn or Facebook ads because then it lives in the spreadsheet that lives on LinkedIn, and you have to download the spreadsheet and follow up on those leads. It was a manual process, but now with things like Zapier and things like that, you can actually create integrations where it will take those leads and funnel them right into your lead management CRM system. So you can get them into the funnel more seamlessly and automated versus having to export from LinkedIn, upload it into your CRM and things like that. But I would say that's the biggest hurdle in the past was that if you're doing a giveaway, once they hit that lead form, it just puts them into this spreadsheet in LinkedIn. So making sure you're going into the spreadsheet, checking and following up and sending those people what they had signed up to receive. But I do think tools like Zapier are helping make that a little more automated.
Do you get any kind of alert when somebody responds, or do you have to literally just keep checking on a link?
I have never received an alert, but it has been a little while since I've done a traditional lead ad,
Hmm.
just like I said, because it is a little more manual of a process. But I typically, because I'm going in and checking my clients' campaigns once a week at least, I would just check the leads, see if there's new leads, and if there are, I would send those over to the client. So I just kind of have a reminder on my calendar to say, like once a week, go in there and check and see. see if anybody's filled it out.
Yeah, and to keep it again into context, automation's great, but sometimes I think people can assume that if it's not totally automated, that means that it's not worthwhile. In this case, if you have somebody, you're running your own campaign, if you got one or two leads a day, you're probably going to be ecstatic, right? And those leads, again, keeping in mind the price point of this, if you're talking about a consulting engagement that could be worth tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars over the lifetime of a client, it's so worth it if you're able to like really reach the CEOs at these companies or whoever you're trying to do. Now, where it becomes a different issue if you have, let's say, a larger training company and you got this big engine going where you're generating leads, you're investing a lot every day into your ad spend. That's where the automation becomes so critical. And with you too, like if you're managing multiple, I can imagine that gets a little bit tricky after a while. But I just want to mention that too because again, a lot of with this industry, and I just kind of I group it all into one thing. It's a very high touch business, right? It's very relationship driven. Usually, the goal in this stage, at the beginning stage, is to drive conversations, right? People aren't buying anything with a click. They're not purchasing. It's all about can you get on a Zoom call or in person with them. So, a little bit of manual effort at the beginning it's probably not that big a deal if you're able to efficiently and passively reach people that would be much more difficult to reach in real life.
Yes, for sure. And then if you do gather these leads through the lead form too, there's a lot of great things you can do data wise with that across Google, across LinkedIn. So, for instance, if you have a list that's at least 300 emails long, you can upload that into LinkedIn and use it for retargeting. You can use it to create like what LinkedIn calls a predictive audience. So, finding people that are probably similar to the people on that list. So, um, there's a lot of email. I mean, email is very valuable. So I always tell people if you can create some sort of lead gen giveaway that you can collect emails, there's a lot of really great ways that you can reutilize that information aside from the income and the leads alone. The data is really important as well.
Yeah, and to add to that, if you're doing active outreach with email, if you're literally cold emailing people, there's I think it's Hunter, there's different resources that today it's relatively easy to find emails if they exist online. And you could, I guess, hypothetically, you tell me if I'm wrong, if there's maybe some restriction with LinkedIn. Does it have to be an owned email list, or it can be something that you're using from your own outreach and you have your own database and CRM of people that you're still trying to actually engage with?
Yeah, if you know that they're qualified somewhat, I mean, I would want to try to use at least as much of a qualified audience as possible. But yeah, you can absolutely, if you have their name and email address, usually those are the three fields. Even I think just email is what they need to be able to match them with the user. Um, and then yeah, they'll kind of build the list from there.
It brings up another reason about why having a CRM is so important, right? Customer relationship management, whatever the acronym is for,
Mhm.
but basically some way for you to manage all this information because, whether even if your cadence or even if your universe of prospects is relatively small, signing up new clients, engaging clients, getting those first conversations requires often a lot of touches to get to that point. And it's an example of if you're able to capture email addresses and you now have this opportunity to be able to target very, very similar people based on a list of email addresses, like you want to be able to take advantage of that. And that information is so critical, really. It's so powerful to be able to have all that at your fingertips. Any thoughts on that or how, I mean, we talked a little bit of how it can integrate with your CRM, which is wonderful if you want to invest the time and money to be able to set those up. But just kind of how these all live together in that ecosystem. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, data is just becoming your owned data, primary first party data is becoming more and more important, especially as these companies are starting to veer towards cookieless tracking where they're not track because of laws and privacy and everything. Companies are starting to not use cookies to track people, and then advertisers are getting nervous. Like, well, then how are we going to target people and find these customers? And pixels like Facebook. And for a while there, when Apple made that update to their operating platform, you could opt out of sharing your data with certain platforms. So Facebook, you would have a pop-up when you downloaded the Facebook app and said, "Do you agree to share your data with this app?" And you could say no for the first time. And everybody got really worried that now Facebook ads are going to be less effective. There's going to be less data to target with. So I always tell people the number one way to not have to worry about any of that and to not have to be concerned with it is just to have your own data to use, because you're always going to be able to use your own email list or your own tracking on your, if you have website visitors. I mean, as long as cookie list doesn't go away and you have a pixel on your website, you should be able to use all that data. But emails are really the number one thing, because if somebody has given you their email, they've given you permission to target them, to speak with them, to outreach to them. So that becomes really valuable, especially with this whole data privacy world where it's constantly changing and there's constantly new rules and things you can and can't do. So emails are super important.
Agreed. They are still important this many years later that we keep hearing about the importance of emails. It's not, it's weird as it sounds. You think at this point, with all the DM and the instant messaging stuff and what social and everything, that would still is important today. As we start to wrap up, for somebody who's thinking about trying this for the first time, right? They're gonna maybe set aside a couple $100, right? And say, hey, let's see what happens. Um, what do you think are some of the things to watch out for? Things, mistakes that maybe you see people make when they first try to do this that we can help them avoid those kinds of expensive mistakes at the beginning?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've touched on a couple already. I think the biggest one is, so it's kind of a double-sided coin. The biggest one is having a large enough audience that you do have. I think with LinkedIn, it's very tempting to get too targeted. So making sure you have enough people in your audience that you're going to have enough inventory to serve your ad, and then learn from it too, because the broader you start with your target audience, the more room you have to refine things. And if you start really targeted, you'll never know, if you might have a surprise out there that something, a certain industry or somebody was interested in your ad, and you would have had no idea if you didn't include them to start with. Um, the flip side of that is starting too broad, and having a huge audience. And then let's say you spend just the $10 a day minimum. Um, you don't want, the tricky part is kind of keeping that frequency, like maybe your monthly frequency at, like, ideally you'd want it to be above a three, four. I mean, you think about your audience and what it takes for people to remember you. I mean, you probably want them to be seeing your ad at least. I mean, people aren't on LinkedIn as often. That's the other part about LinkedIn. They're getting on less frequently than they are Facebook and places like that. But I mean, at least maybe once a week you want them when they get on. That's kind of the average, I think, that they say people get on LinkedIn is once a week. It used to be, at least. I don't know if that's still an accurate stat.
I
Um,
was gonna say that I need some therapy and some
yeah.
intervention because once a week, wow, I don't even. I'm like a lot of the people that I see on there a lot. It's like multiple times a day, too often.
Yes. I think it's the average person is maybe on there once a week. So it's just not as like Facebook, where it's like people are on multiple times a day, all the time, whenever they have down. So they're just less frequently on there. So if they see your ad maybe once a week when they get on, I mean, that's a decent frequency. So that would be a three, four time frequency a month. So just keeping an eye on that and making sure that's not too low, because if it is too low, people might just be seeing your ad one time and then that's not really enough to get them to engage with it. So that's how I sort of gauge my audience size, is you want to be above that $50,000 or 50,000 threshold. The audience they will give you as you're building your audience. They'll kind of show you how large it is on the side, but also not so big. So like I have nationwide clients that will come to me and say, we want to reach, let's say, higher education institute, play higher ed across the country. And then we'll say, okay, well, if you, for $10 a day, let's focus on like 4 states maybe to start. And then we'll see what that gets us as far as frequency. And then if we feel like we have room to move or if the budget has room to increase, then we'll open it up. But thinking about like where's the low hanging fruit, or maybe you do it by saying, okay, well, I'm in Ohio, so I'm going to target Ohio and the surrounding states to start just because that's where I'm located. Or if you're like, I currently have a ton of clients out in California, maybe you start in California to start and then build from there.
No, that's a good point, and I want to just finish up on one thought too. You talked about frequency of ads. I'm going to tell you my point of view on this. You could tell me whether I'm nuts or whether you agree or whatever. And we'll kind of leave it at this for people to think about. In general, there's two types of advertising, right? I mean, there's multiple, but like if we carved it into two halves, you have your branding, right? Your awareness ad. You want to create brand awareness. So think of like, Coca-Cola ads, right? They're ubiquitous, right? And then there's the like a direct response thing. My point of view on this is branding is not necessarily for this audience that I'm trying to serve. You're trying to reach somebody who has a problem, who you might be able to help, and you want to engage them, start that conversation. Branding, yes, multiple impressions of your face and your name and the work you do, that it certainly is a nice thing to have, but you're paying for that. So
Mhm.
my sense is that the most effective way to use this kind of platform or similar platforms is you're trying to get them to see your ad the first time and to recognize through your copy and through your creative approach that this is something that's relevant to them and you want them clicking on it that first time. Maybe it takes two or three impressions before they'll do it, but go for it where you want to grab their attention with something that's super, super relevant to a problem they're having. Um, so that's just my take, and I want to get your impression on that, yay or nay.
Yeah, and test if you have kind of an inkling that there's 3 or 4 different pain points that your potential client or potential customer is experiencing, kind of create an ad copy around each of those pain points and run all 4 of them next to each other and see, because you might be surprised. Well, like this is a way bigger deal to people and is causing a lot more action on my ads than this other one that maybe isn't as big of a deal or not as important. So, you can learn a lot. Like I think we've said this before, you can learn a lot about your audience by running these ads and really testing messaging side by side. But you have to also just consider people on LinkedIn are in there on the minds with the mindset of they want to learn, they're networking. So create your ads with that in mind of you're solving a problem, you're helping them learn and grow and become a better professional because that's ultimately what people are on LinkedIn to do.
Special thanks to Carissa Richardson for joining me on the show. If you enjoyed the show, I hope you'll consider subscribing and leaving a review. And don't forget to visit marcuschaller.com/subscribe for weekly troubleshooting guides and tips to help you find and fix the weak spots in your marketing that are holding you back, fine tune your positioning and marketing strategy, and start growing again by attracting more of your ideal clients. Again, that's marcuschaller.com/subscribe.